Our goal is to look at wartime in East Asia. And by wartime, we subsequently mean World War II. We begin in China, where Mao Zedong emerges as the leader of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, Mao was first and foremost a peasant who never forgot his roots, and he believed that the soul of China lay in the countryside. This is where the Chinese departed from the roots of Marxism. The Bolsheviks in Russia found their audience in the industrial working class, while the Chinese began to look towards the peasant villages for support. So the peasants didn't immediately rise up as they had done in Russia, but after years of land reform, guerrilla warfare, and the creation of a communist military force to protect liberated areas, the CCP, or the Chinese Communist Party, began to gain support. The CCP recruited women to their cause by outlawing arranged marriages in communist-controlled areas. All right, they made divorce easier, and they granted women the right to vote and own property. Women's associations promoted literacy and encouraged discussion on women's issues. However, traditional resistance from rural peasant villages did cause them to alter these early rules, such as no divorcing men on active duty, land deeds were given to male heads of family, etc. The low point, which got turned into a positive, but the low point for the CCP came in 1934 and 1935, when they were chased around rural China by the forces of the Kuomintang. You're going to see that a civil war has broken out between the communists and the nationalists. All in all, they crossed 18 mountain ranges, 24 rivers, and covered 6,000 miles. 10,000 began the journey, and 7,000 ended it. But they became the core supporters of the CCP after the Long March. It was after this time that they consolidated their power in the countryside, and Mao was even interviewed by an American journalist named Edgar Snow, whose book Red Star Over China was the first Western account of what was going on in the Chinese interior. Now, during the war, the two sides agreed to a ceasefire. The Japanese actually destroyed much of the Kuomintang's power, and they became dependent on warlords in the interior. The Communist Party grew from 40,000 strong in 1937 to 1.2 million by the end of World War II, and the People's Liberation Army had 900,000 soldiers with an additional 2 million militia. The support came from the tenacity with which the CCP resisted the Japanese with their guerrilla tactics, while the Kuomintang just seemed more interested in rooting out communists. They encouraged peasants to speak out in public meetings and settle accounts with their landlords. So they solved two issues. They dealt with foreign imperialism, and they addressed the realities of peasant life. So the war puts this greater conflict on hold in China. Meanwhile, Japan will serve as the aggressors. Now, in the interwar years, we're talking World War I to World War II, there was really no civilian oversight of the military. They were kind of allowed to act unfiltered as they saw fit. Bushido, serving the state, was taken to an extreme level, and the Japanese began to believe that they were, at minimum, the superior East Asian race, but a superior race unto themselves. So these all combine to explain the military influence over Japan. And when Britain and France got involved in World War II, European colonies in Southeast Asia seemed ripe for the taking. You got supplies of oil and rubber and other materials that are all right there. France was under German control, so they allowed Japan to occupy Indochina. The United States responded by stopping shipments of steel, scrap iron, oil, and rubber, and these are vital to the Japanese war machine. Japan has three options. They give up their conquests, they face economic ruin, or they go to war with America, and they chose war. Now, Admiral Yamamoto told the Prime Minister that Japan could sustain the fight for about 6 months to a year, but not much after that. He had had experience in traveling to America, and he had seen the industrial might of the United States. With the snap of a finger, he knew that auto plants in Detroit would start to turn out tanks and jeeps instead of basic cars. Now, at Pearl Harbor, the cabinet made plans for a surprise attack on the Pacific Fleet at Pearl. They succeeded, but the U.S. aircraft carriers were at sea, and so they were saved. By 1942, you can see Japan's sphere of influence, and they called it the Greater East Asia Prosperity Sphere. When we sum up the key engagements of World War II, a month before Midway, the United States had defeated the Japanese at the Coral Sea, preventing any chance of a Japanese invasion of Australia. And at Midway, they destroyed 4 of Japan's 6 largest aircraft carriers, meaning that Japan would have to retreat gradually in defense of their home islands. Now, the closer the Americans got to Japan, the more brutal it became. These numbers are not incorrect. 7,000 out of 70,000 Americans were killed in action. 216 Japanese were taken alive at Iwo Jima. Okinawa is even more ghastly, where many Japanese are choosing to commit ritual harikari instead of fight to the bitter end or surrender. All of these explain the final decision that President Truman made to drop the atomic bomb and thus end World War II.